So to get started here, let me introduce our guests. First is Brian Dugo with Mid-Valley Ag, and then JJ Gross with Colusa County Farm Supply. Welcome both.
Morning, Drew.
Good morning. So let me start by asking Brian, what is your territory and how long have you been a PCA? Brian, you there? Let's switch to JJ. We'll ask you the same question. What's your territory and how long have you been a PCA?
Well, the name says it, Colusa County primarily. I go into Sutter and Glenn counties also, a little bit in Yolo. And I've been a PCA full-time since 2005.
That's great. So let's just jump right in with a few questions. I'm going to start with one that I think is going to be informative and also kind of give some folks some alternatives. Is with the recent news coming out of the EU announcing that it plans to reduce the MRL of flupiram from the current 0.05 parts per million, same as the US, to 0.03 parts per million. What are some of those alternatives that you could recommend to growers?
Hey, Drew, Brian just texted me that he's stuck in mute. Can you help him with that?
He's stuck in what?
He's muted and he can't.
Sure.
Can't unmute.
Let me see. Let me find him.
So to answer your question about the fluopyram, that's primarily in the Luna group of fungicides from Bayer. It's they're all 2 active ingredient fungicides, and fluopyram's is obviously essential to what they do. Fortunately, they are primarily used at bloom because they are so effective and broad spectrum. I'm not the person to answer what the change in the MRL level. I'm not really familiar with what the residual is at the time of harvest. So I imagine it's fine to use at bloom. I would certainly be cautious because they are effective on alternaria and whole rot. I would be cautious using them late in the season until we have a better understanding on the residual MRL.
Yeah, what our pre-harvest should be. I actually think I'm going to reach out here, and feel free not to join in, but Jim, I think, is on the line. Jim Atascavich, if you have any recommendations you'd like to share with folks, that would be great. Nope. Okay. And Brian, I wasn't able to unmute you, unfortunately. Okay. So any questions, folks? Not at the moment. Okay. So let's see here. My next question, JJ, I was trying to get some of the regionality. If we can get Brian unmuted, that would be great. I was trying to get some of the regionality sense of what are some of the bigger concerns in terms of disease and pests that you guys have been seeing in the different regions. Obviously, you're up in the Sacramento Valley. We have Brian down in the San Joaquin Valley. So in your perspective and in your territory, what are some of the big concerns that you're seeing?
So historically, brown rot is the biggest disease concern. However, we do have quite a few tools to manage it. So, if you're able to get in the orchard and you're diligent, typically growers are able to keep brown rot more or less under control. The one that has snuck up on us on the west side of the Sacramento Valley in recent years is alternaria. As almonds move into more marginal ground, into the valley, heavy ground that was previously used for rice production, alternaria has become a bigger issue, and also band canker. Actually, the same situation on heavy ground with a lot of moisture, and band canker is also related to seems to be related to the newer, more vigorous rootstocks. How we're growing trees. Because we're growing trees faster.
Yeah, high horsepower, a lot of nitrogen.
Yeah, that seems to lead to band canker infections.
Yeah, absolutely. So next question I have here is pests to start monitoring. Clearly, we're coming into February. There are a few there that we need to start getting traps out and really start monitoring. Can you tell me which ones we should really be looking out for early in the season?
The number one thing I'm looking at right now is naval orangeworm mummies, and make sure, or excuse me, mummies for naval orangeworm, to make sure we have as few as possible left behind. Make sure they are blown out of the strips into the middle of the orchard rows where they can be mowed, and then make sure the tractor drive is going very slow in order to pulverize the mummies into pieces that they'll either deteriorate or are so small that they can't host the navel orangeworm larvae.
Yeah, and what would you say is the drop dead date there for folks to get those mummies out of the tree, onto the ground, flail mode, or at least taken care of? What would be the drop dead date there?
February 1st now.
Okay.
But if you miss it, I wouldn't give up. I would still blow and mow.
Okay, so let's see here. We have a question from Alec. What are some strategies to reduce costs? Reduce costs to pesticide herbicides during these times of low almond prices. So I guess where if we had to budget, what would you cut?
Right.
What would you really take advantage of there?
That's a great question. You have to look at what you're willing to risk. Certainly if you have some brown rot, you can clean it up in subsequent years. Brown rot's relatively inexpensive to control. Um, where I've cut most in the last 2 seasons, I would say with dormant sprays and maybe with potash, just because potash is such a big cost that it's an easy place where you can really move the lever. And also there is some soil banking where if you've been diligent in the past, you might have enough potash to get you through a season, and you can apply more when the price turns around and try to get your orchard caught back up. So it's not a pest management question, but actually potash is where I tend to move the needle. And then when prices are good, that's where we'll spend more money a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Hello, do you have a copy? This is Brian Dugo.
Brian, welcome.
Yeah. All right,
So I
got
guess
through.
awesome.
All
Let's
apologies
ask
there.
you the same question. So JJ just kind of covered some of the primary diseases and pests that he's concerned for in terms of being up in the Sacramento Valley. What would you really say are some of the prime suspects to kind of keep an eye on down in the San Joaquin Valley?
Yeah, JJ did a great job covering it. I apologize to everybody that's tuning in, and I wasted their time there for a few minutes. My name's Brian Dugo. I'm a PCA with Mid-Valley Ag. I work out of the Oakdale, Riverbank, Modesto, Waterford area. Main irrigation districts are like SSJID, OID, MID. Yeah, so currently, JJ hit it on the head as far as monitoring your mummies for navel orangeworm. Considering you don't want to repeat any mistakes that you made last year. Always keep in mind your history, and so that's kind of my barometer going into the following season. Is where do we need to improve? So navel orangeworm is the number one pest I'm looking for during the dormant time. JJ mentioned skipping dormant sprays, and a lot of people have done that. It started, I feel, with a pressure from a regulatory standpoint to cut down our copper applications, winter insecticide applications. But after 4 or 5 years, you revisit these orchards, and you can find scale populations, San Jose scale populations. So it's a good idea to check where you're at with scale. and there's a couple varieties, Independence, Monterey, surprise you and build up some walnut scale populations too. So it's don't neglect, looking for those winter pests that we used to look for 20 years ago. So that's my 2 cents there.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for joining us. And I guess my next question is really going to be looking into leaf-footed bug. How big of an issue is it in your area, Brian? And then we'll go to JJ and kind of cover the same topic there.
Yeah, so it's don't forget your history and what you've dealt with that pest. I can't remember if it was 10, 12 years ago when it really first kind of hammered us, and it was very varietal specific, tended to be varietal specific, concentrating on some pollinators specifically. It's a really tough pest. And then we have the BMSB coming on the stage too. So, there's some real challenges in the field. It's really important that, once the bloom is done, to try to get those bees out. Encourage growers, hey, let's get the bees out. If we have some true bug issues, if it's leaf-footed plant bug or brown worm-related stink bug or even box elder bugs, we need to utilize insecticides early in the springtime. You want to make sure those bees are gone because not to offend anybody, but at that point they're all liabilities to us. That's leaf-footed has been an increasing but hit and miss problem for me. I have orchards that I have to spray year in, year out, but it's not always area widespread, and I miss our sit-down meetings where it's in person, where you get to interact with people. Roger Duncan in Stanislaus County runs a IPM breakfast meeting where we would all interact and what are you seeing out there? And it's amazing to me how these springs go by and all of a sudden no one's seeing it.
Yeah.
and you've done a preventative spray or two, and well, I guess it's not going to be a problem this year, so you stay diligent with it, but it's an unpredictable major pest.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it seems to just be growing in terms of concern in both regions. JJ, are you seeing it much up north?
No, it's not on the top of our list, and I would say it's not a big economic concern until it is. So I haven't actually had an issue the last couple of years, so it's probably bound to sneak up on us because we're not really haven't paid attention like we were 3 years ago. But yeah, same thing. It's super varietal specific. So for monitoring, you beat the limbs with a bat or a sweep net, and you can see or hear them fly off. They're a 1 inch long insect, and look on the ground.
Make a lot of noise. They definitely make a lot of noise when they take flight.
Yeah, and then look for strikes in those same varieties, Monterey, Fritz. Look for strikes in the tree or on the ground.
Right.
And that'll start mid-March.
So here we have a question coming in. This might be a tough one. Is how do you get rid of mummies when you have cover crops? Have you guys had any experience with that so far?
I have trouble getting.
Go ahead, JJ. Sorry.
I don't know the answer to that. I know the cover crop, holds moisture and biology, so it'll help break down the mummy, but I don't know that it would be adequate compared to slow mowing. That's a tough one.
Brian, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of the cover crop. I have some fields that get planted with cover crops. There's great advantages to getting a taproot going in the center with your mustards, and so I highly recommend just getting those nuts out of the tree. And there comes a point where you don't want the vegetation in the center, for whether it be for frost protection or if it's drawing moisture from your crop. So get the nuts on the ground and get them destroyed when you destroy your cover crop. So if you're worried about mummies getting hung up in February in that cover crop, that's not really a concern. The timing is later to where they become an issue. So the key thing is to get them out of the tree, and then you can blow them later, or if your cover crop hasn't taken off yet, blow them into your cover crop, and then destroy them when you destroy your cover crop.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the 2 cents I was going to add was get them down and destroy it when you mow or bring down your cover crop. The other thing is something I've learned from an IPM advisor in the area is that, yes, cover crops do help with the deterioration of those mummies, just sheer moisture content underneath, and obviously the biological activity happening underneath that canopy of the cover crop is going to help with deterioration, but you still want to come in with a flail mower or even go in there and just mow down your cover crop, which will then take care of the mummies as well.
Yeah.
So let's see, any questions out there? Anyone want to unmute themselves, ask questions? Okay, we'll go on to the next one. So next is mites. For me, this is one that's kind of crept up again, becoming more and more of an issue for us. I know that during harvest, we start to see a flare up in mites. What kind of span and time are you guys seeing in both of your regions? And what are you doing to control or at least monitor mites in your area?
Want to go, JJ?
Sure. So, 2020, not entirely sure why, it was a very light mite year in our area. This isn't necessarily the best IPM approach, but we try to get something on before harvest, because otherwise, inevitably, they end up flaring up during harvest. Last year probably would have been the exception. Ivermectin's still a tool, but it should be used judiciously before leaves harden off. And I do actually, one good news on the pesticide side is that Envidor, I think, was slated to be discontinued maybe at the end of this season. And Gowan took it over, and for whatever reason, they're going to be able to produce it indefinitely. And Envidor is a very effective miticide.
Yeah,
Right.
I would. I'd say miticide trends have changed since I've been in PCA. So I'm going on about 20 years now, which makes me sound old. But I would say the old approach that we used to do was to May spray with ivermectin, and I'm pretty well convinced that a lot of times we did more harm than good by just destroying our beneficials. And it took a while for us to get out of that practice, and not just carelessly throwing an ivermectin out there. I would say it's probably the most widely used miticide, especially when economics are what they are right now with the commodity pricing. Ivermectin is very attractive, and every year it continues to be attractive. But I encourage you guys to switch to less impactful miticides, to beneficials. In my area, not an acre goes without a miticide, and I've delayed it from just throwing an ivermectin on in May and maybe even a second one at whole split, or coming back with another miticide at whole split. So just delaying that a little bit longer, but generally around harvest time is when everybody gets one. And I agree with JJ. Last year it didn't blow up. Those temperatures have to be there.
Yeah.
Dews in the morning really slow them down at harvest time.
I thought you made a really good point in terms of backing off some of the broad spectrum treatments, or at least some of the harsher chemicals, where you really start to see an uptick in our beneficials. So how much have you guys seen 6-spotted thrips out there in some of the sticky traps?
I see them. I might not be the best at monitoring for beneficials. that statement that I made is just a statement of observation, not off of the six-spotted thrip decline in the orchard that I see, but more of just an absolute explosion where there's no predatory pressure to hold them back.
Yeah.
You turn your head and 1 week it just turns into a fire, and you have to evaluate what you're doing to know that when one orchard explodes like that, it's not just from dust from the border. You kind of messed with that environment in the orchard.
It's from some of our lack of predator-prey dynamics out there. You have no beneficials to keep them in check.
Yeah,
We have a question coming.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, JJ.
Well, I mean, there was a time where abamectin gave you this easily 90 days of protection, and so there was some out behind the May spray, but that's not the case anymore. It doesn't last as long, so it's more of a shortly before whole split kind of spray for me.
Yeah. So we have a question coming in from Pedro. Has anyone seen more San Jose scale and walnut scale in almonds lately? And what can and when should we treat for this? Is now a good time?
You want to take this one, Brian? So I have seen them more, and for some reason it's just in the Monterey variety, and I know a number of other PCAs in my area have said you can treat. There's basically two treatment techniques, from my understanding: the smaller stage and then a dormant stage. So which is we're coming to the end of right now. But it's not something I have to treat for a lot. So maybe Brian can add to that.
Yeah, it's definitely something when I've talked to a few different folks out there in the IPM world, where San Jose scale really has dropped below a lot of people's radar. We don't see quite as much pressure. And this, again, is partially due to our selective use, our IPM programs in terms of monitoring and trapping, and really just kind of getting out there and doing your dormant season scouting on some of those buds and really just kind of getting an idea of what's out there. And then obviously what follows with that is the uptick in beneficial insects. So really we've started to find ourselves having orchards that have a bit more of a dynamic sense in terms of predator and prey. So I think we're heading in the right direction by developing some more of our economic thresholds and really looking at monitoring and trapping as a primary means.
Am I back on now?
You're back on, Brian.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I got muted out again. So as far as timing goes, now is a good time, but in a sense, it's not a good time because there's bees moving into areas. So there's a tremendous amount of hesitance amongst applicators, even if you're using a growth regulator like C's or Centaur for your scale control, to put any insecticides out. I totally understand there's no bloom going on in our orchards, on weeds in the orchard, but just guys are moving bees into stockpile yards, and I tell you that the bees have tremendously impacted our insecticide applications. So now is a good time for San Jose scale, for walnut scale, like I was talking about earlier in Independence and Monterey. But it just you got to beat the bees. So prior to now, into December, it's fine. Then you get your oil and insecticide out there and get them back under control.
Great. Thank you both for your feedback on that. Let's talk about nitrogen really quick and nitrogen budgeting and when to start and really where we're looking at this year in terms of nitrogen after such a heavy load last year. Is there anything you would do differently due to the huge crop last year? And how would you start budgeting for your nitrogen program?
So you can't Monday morning quarterback as far as nitrogen goes for this year. You have to rely on the fact that you tried to do a good job last year, monitoring your tissues with the crop that we were holding and meeting the demands of the developing buds that you had going on. So you take in consideration that we had a big crop last year. It's going to impact how buds develop and set for the following season. But if you didn't do a good job last year, you could have hurt yourself. So I tend to approach it. I try to delay my nitrogen applications until I get some vegetation going, actually, or just prior to that, considering rain or water that we're going to get it incorporated with, but just trying to be mindful of leaching. So I try to set a target amount of units out that I'm going to do regardless, and then assess the crop in the springtime and see if we need to up it and monitor with tissue samples.
Great. JJ?
Yeah, I agree with Brian. We knew we had a heavy crop from the start last year, so we adjusted the nitrogen rates up accordingly last year. And we think that we addressed it and are starting this year with a full normal nitrogen allocation inside the tree. So this is hopefully a new year, new independent year. We'll address this year's crop.
Yeah, and the demand that this year's crop is looking for.
Exactly.
Great. Well, with that, I'm going to go on with a few slides coming up. I'd like to thank both Brian and JJ for joining us for the live Q&A with PCAs. Give me 1 second here. Let's see.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brian, did you have a question or a comment?
Hello?
Yep, I'm here, Brian. All right, so I wanted to go ahead and plug. Give me 1 second. It's
Can I ask Ken a question? Is Ken still on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Ken, are you still there?
I am still here.
Oh, wonderful. Hey, Ken, I had a question for you. I mean, I get asked cultural practices all the time, and you talk to growers that are on it. I mean, it's water is absolutely our number one input that we put into the crops and water management. Just outside of the box, when you fully meet or maybe overshoot the demand of the tree as far as water needs go through the season, possibly being above ET, but not causing phytophthora or anything, but just over meeting the water demands of a tree, Ken, is there any possibility that we're triggering vegetative growth versus fruit spurs and fruit buds, and actually having a negative impact by pushing water too hard in certain scenarios? Could you comment on that, or you have any thoughts on that?
I think you put your finger right on it. I definitely think that, if you've got a young orchard and you're trying to fill the space, you want to see that vegetative growth. And we keep getting clues from just from experience that the high yielding orchards are not the ones that are the least stressed. We haven't really done a good study of this. My current guess, however, is that there is a positive relation between stress and crop load. And of course, crop load has a lot to do with bees and all that stuff, but there's nothing you can, there's a lot that the environment has to do with that. In terms of water, though, I think that there's a general relation that when there's some stress during the season, and we don't know when and how much really, but that you have more crop load. And the only way I think I can explain that is that you're getting maybe more shoots developing or buds or breaks or something like that, and sort of more spur development and that kind of thing. So I think that the baseline has been a good reference, but you have to be very careful that assuming that that's the target. I don't think that's the target. I think probably some dryness is good in long term for yields, but the problem is we just haven't done the experiments to really test that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think you've got the right thinking here.
Yeah, really good question, Brian. Thank you for answering, Ken. That was great. Any other questions as we come to a wrap here? Before we go, I would like to share with everyone here, if you're not familiar with the almonds.com website, we do have a tools and resources tab that you can see here. And if you go down to the grower tools section, you can find information anywhere from incentive opportunities and then spanning over to pollination and crop protection tools as well. I strongly encourage folks, not just PCAs, not just growers, but anyone out there that's listening that would really like to get an idea of what's out there in terms of incentives or just tools for irrigation, dust reduction, whatever it is. We try to make sure to keep everyone up to date and keep you all informed. So the next thing here is stay up to date. We have our About Us and program and events page here where you could see upcoming events within the almond board and across the industry in California. And this is a fantastic way to stay connected. And lastly, give me 1 second here, there's a delay. And lastly, I'd like to thank everyone for joining. My information is listed here up top. And please join us for our next training Tuesday, which is groundwater recharge best management practices, the why and the how. So that's going to be on February 2nd. And with that, thank you everyone for joining.